Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I am your host, Joe Menchefski, and this is the show where we look at the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, and our general joy of being alive. And of course, we always talk about sustainable design as well. I am really excited today. I'm doing a series on specific, types of buildings and, applications. And so I had some design leaders on in the past, and today we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the world of retail. Now, we have this wonderful thing going with Little Diversified Architectural, and I've had Roger Wilkerson on, and I've had Garrett Herbst on as well, two of my favorite episodes. And so today I'm in real luck. I've got Eric Daniel and Rich Glenny with us. So Eric is design principal and creative director at Little, and Rich is a retail design leader. And today we're going to get our hands dirty and roll up our sleeves and learn a little bit about retail design. Hello, Eric. Hello, Rich. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Joe.
Hello. It's just wonderful to have you guys here. I always start by allowing our audience to get to know the guests a little bit. So tell me a little bit about you. And Eric, let's start with you first. Tell me about the journey that led you to becoming the creative director at Little.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Lovely to be here with you today. And I feel very fortunate to be where I am here with Little. I believe I'm in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, doing exactly the right thing. And that's a really good feeling to have. And it has been an interesting journey to get here with Little. I've been designing and consulting with retailers and brands at retail for around 30 years. And I seem to love the trade. I think that the work that we do in retail design is among the most difficult creative endeavors that you will find, maybe short of making a movie, because it's very similar in that we're staging actors on stages and creating the conditions where the right activities and actions will occur.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, continue, please. I just had to comment on what you just said there. Go ahead,
listen, I don't like presentations, but I love conversations. So anytime you want to interrupt me, please, for the love of God, do. But I'm unique in this realm a little bit. There are other people like me, but I started as a graphic designer. And over time, I worked my way into doing more of the environmental side of the business. And I'm here through really the generosity of some people that I have worked with that have really been essential in my formulation, like Paul Lecklider. He's now retired, but he was with FRCH, now Nelson, down in Cincinnati. And he was such a powerful creative force. He was very inspiring. What that man could do with a roll of tracing paper and a Sharpie was dangerous. And I wanted to be dangerous like that. Denny Gerdeman, if you know Denny Gerdeman from Shoot Gerdeman fame, Denny is one of the truly, genuinely nice people and good people in our business. And I learned quite a bit from him. And it was a lovely place to work where they were very proud to work on their instincts and intuition and not as rigorous about strategy. Now that changed over time within Shoot Gerdeman, but I enjoyed their perspective on work and it helped form me. And there at Shoot Gerdeman, I met Bob Welty, who's now with his own company, Row Creative Union. But Bob was one of the most generous creative partners I've ever been paired with. And he gave me the freedom to really become what I aspired to be. And I can't thank him enough. And Lee Peterson, great thought leader in our business. I can't get him. He's a cool guy. He's a cool cat and everybody should know him. And then Christian Davies, a master storyteller, longtime Fitcher. Now he's with Bergmeyer. But I still can't tell a story or put a presentation together the way that Christian Davies can. Nobody can, I think. I'm the product of so many greater people than me, including James Farnell here with Little, who is the leader of our practice, a kind and gentle and very thoughtful leader of our practice. I have great admiration for him, but I'm nothing without all those people that have helped me get here.
Yeah, we all stand on the shoulders of giants for sure. For anybody who's watching on video, I'm pretty sure Eric and I are related and we were separated at birth or something like that. So I have to move on. Rich, it's your turn. Rich is our retail design leader at Little. Tell us about yourself, Rich, your background and how you ended up in this role.
Yeah, probably a lot simpler story, a lot less wandering than Eric. I just fell into it a little bit being at the Cleveland Institute of Art in Cleveland, Ohio, which happened to have an interior architecture program that was very retail focused. I was probably drawn in more by the just the level of ideation, sketching, hand drawing, illustration, and especially the instructors that we had at the time. They were just masters of that. And I think probably an unknown factor that is in probably both of our stories is that most people don't recognize Ohio as being this kind of retail design mecca where you have, I don't know, we could probably name probably 20, 30 people who've played huge parts in retail, all working at firms out of Ohio. So, I didn't go to school knowing that was going to be the outcome, but just kind of happened into this kind of gold vein of retail design, leadership, and just skills. And from there, just ended up going south, crossing the Mason-Dixon line from a United States perspective down to Charlotte through connections, and just have been at Little for the past 18 years, seen lots of changes, learned a ton from a whole lot of people. And just, I think a unique part about Little, again, in retail is kind of like the redheaded stepchild of like architecture and interiors. And being in a retail program that's not retail only, but you have workplace, office, healthcare, people doing colleges, universities, schools, civic engineering, all of that in one place is, it's a very different environment and it's an interesting place to be. So,
Joe, Rich raises a topic that we are inevitably going to get to today, and that is the distinction between big A and little a architecture. Both are practiced here at Little, big A being where the building is the intent of the project, and little a being where the building is secondary to what happens inside it.
Interesting.
That's retail. I
Interesting.
liken that I used the notion of stage and actors before, but if I could, big A is the people that build the building that houses the theater. And retail design is what fills the seats in that theater and what occupies the stage.
So how does that manifest itself in the way you operate on a day-to-day basis, or let's say on a project-by-project basis? How does that manifest itself in that the big A and the little a are two separate things? Eric, why don't you go first on that one, since you broached that topic?
Great. There's a different approach, and we have cultural differences between the practices amongst the studios. We all get along, but we're very differently composed people. I'm not an architect. I'm a designer. Now, being in this business for 30 years, I've learned quite a bit about architecture. I know enough to rely on the people that are smarter than me, because a designer left to his own devices can cause trouble. So architects in this sense make me a better designer. And I, in turn, believe that because we poke and we prod and we challenge assumptions, that we make them better architects.
Now, does it make you a better designer because they provide the constraints, the boundaries within which you have to operate?
Well, God love you. Yes, retail, the world of retail is full of constraints, including, your approach to the definition of space. And, everything goes along swimmingly if you're not in a position to challenge anything about the space that you're inheriting. But that is when we're creating a brand specific experience and an operation, a retail operation, with the intent to produce revenue, then you necessarily come in conflict with the status quo. Constraints are constant. Overcoming them and adapting to them is the art of retail design.
Love it. All right, Rich, let's switch to you. Give me your definition of retail design. What is it? How would you describe to somebody what that profession is, what that practice is?
I mean, I think kind of piggybacking some on what Eric was saying, I think like some of the key parts about it, I mean, the purpose is a little bit different. I mean, and number one, you're facilitating, this economic transaction between a buyer and a seller. I think on the other hand, a big portion of retail versus other that I think is getting into other aspects of architecture is just the reality of a brand that you're dealing with. You're not given a blank sheet of paper. You're working with a lot of existing assets that they have, and you need to be able to communicate that to, the potential customers and everyone else in an effective way that both sides kind of understand what's going on. I think there's also a importance of cultural connection that might be at a different level than other forms. I'm probably going to get myself in trouble with a lot of people with this. And I think finally, the biggest aspect to me is there's this transience and this competitive aspect to this form of architecture. Like if you do a mediocre library, that thing's going to be there for like 25, 30, 40 years. If you do a mediocre store, it might be like 3 to 4 months or, maybe a year. But the lifespan of that's going to be threatened a lot more just because of the competitive nature. You have people doing similar things that are competing against what you're doing, and it's a lot more dynamic in that sense.
Now, you spoke of form. I certainly see all the branding aspects when I think about retail design. There's a lot of, there's color patterns you have to follow, that sort of, very concrete kind of thing. But the form of the building itself, I mean, is that dictated by the brand, the customer's brand, or do you have some freedom there with regards to form? How much freedom do you have?
I mean, that probably depends. I mean, you have two kind of competing aspects. You have the program of what you have to accomplish, which is going to impact the form, whether it's the site, whether you have dealing with things like a drive-through parking requirements, all those aspects that might push and pull on your building itself. And then on top of that shell that's there, that's created by those constraints, then you have a certain level of freedom, I think, as to how, in a sense, set the stage, both in the sense of like trade dress, what it looks like when you're driving by, as well as to how it interacts as you go up and kind of the more theatrical aspect or how you interact with the inside of it. I mean, there's a lot that you're going to have to work with that's existing. It's just a matter of your ability to translate that to a building, which, depending on the brand and the brand's history, that might be more or less, or a high percentage of our work is going into an existing building. So again, you're going to have constraints there by the developer, by just what the building is and how much they want to invest. You can go on and on.
Right.
There's a lot of practical constraints on the forms of buildings, from jurisdictional requirements to standard building practices. Rich and I were preparing for this session together, and we were asking what is a good building. And frankly, within the realm of retail, which is our area of expertise, there are relatively few great buildings. Now, because, as Rich said, we most often move into spaces that are already provided. So there's a lot of tenant improvement work in the realm of retail. There's a lot of the, dirt that becomes out parcels in commercial drives. But, when you're working on a pro forma like that, the exuberance of that expression or that form is generally not part of that program. Beautiful form is available to us in the components and the accommodations that we create inside. As I said, my history is that of a graphic designer. I believe that when you are inventing a new brand, that the perfect process would be that you decide the brand identity, meaning the formal logo and brand standards, before you would engage in what the expression of that is through architecture. Because the language of form that is expressed or embodied in your brand identity should influence everything you make for the brand if you're creating a truly rock solid brand. And even that process is rather rare.
Okay. I would say it's just kind of add in, it's not like this architect situation where it's like, oh, we're hiring Frank Gehry and we're getting a Frank Gehry building. You're always coming into it responding to existing materials and forms and ideas that you're always working with that.
Manage the connection between building occupants and the outside world using Solera translucent glass. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Okay, so let's talk about, elements that are unique to retail design. Let's start with you, Rich. What are the things that are the elements that are typically common in every project, every job, and unique to retail?
Yeah, Rich, list those three things.
I mean, yeah, it's going to be three different things if you're talking about, say, like a Walmart or a Louis Vuitton or a Starbucks or a your local restaurant. But I think part of the history of retail design goes back to visual merchandising and also industrial design and the creation of like POP and point of purchase and fixtures. And I think that is something that I think is different, where you're really having to get in and a lot of times design and form that space through how you're displaying and how you're organizing, the products or services that are being sold. Obviously, there's always going to be the cash wrap or a point of transaction. That's always going to be there as well. And I guess those are kind of the two key different things that you're going to be having in retail. I'll let you add the third, Eric, if you have another one, or
Well, to
fourth.
every rule, there's an exception, because there's no longer a checkout in Apple, which is among the most beautiful, open, meaning freedom of movement, retail spaces and highly productive retail spaces that we know today. I would say that that you have to talk about hard goods versus soft goods in particular ways, and then of course retail versus food service in particular ways. But I think there are two constants, or maybe three constants, that pervade, and that is storytelling, product positioning, and experience. And I'll start with experience, because there's always an experience in retail, whether you've planned for it or not. Our job in retail design is to provide a repeatable, continually positive experience for the guest. Now, that is where we set the stage for the right things to happen. And because I've come to believe that experience is something we can prepare for, but it is a bespoke product that is manufactured immediately by the guest when they come in contact with your proposition. So you can come to the table with all the best intentions, but how the guest arrives to your space and what their first impression is the very definition of what your brand experience is. Our job is to prepare everything in such a way, including the people that occupy the store, prepare them in such a way that experience can be positive time and time again.
Okay, fantastic. All right, let's talk about emotion. These spaces are often designed to evoke a very specific emotion or specific behavior, sense of luxury, sense of urgency. How do you leverage architectural elements, color, scale, acoustics, to shape those desired, psychological outcomes? Rich, why don't you go first on this one?
I was hoping Eric would go first on this. No.
You guys can decide.
I think you can speak on kind of reverse engineer that a little bit into how you can tell that you feel different ways in different spaces. So if you say like you're going into a Target or Walmart that's very well organized, where someone's probably just trying to find something, maybe Target has a little more of an exploratory aspect to it with some of their products, but compared to say something like a Trader Joe's, at least the ones I've experienced, which are a little bit more of a train wreck, which is actually literal in the sense that things are not on a grid. Things are usually at an angle or something's off. And, that creates a very different kind of feeling or experience. And then, you get to luxury, and where you have a lot less product, a lot more material. And then again, you're getting into the impact of color more, or texture, or just a sense of luxury through the materials that create, much more of a calm gallery type of experience typically. I don't know. I'll let you add on to that, Eric.
Oh, sure. Joe, I was recently in Las Vegas for a trade show, and I took a few hours to make sure that you get around and see the retail of Las Vegas, because there's quite a bit to see there. It's one of the best places to go and have like a laboratory study of retail, because it's so dense and everybody wants to show up in Las Vegas in the best way possible. So we were in the new Fontainebleau Hotel and Casino, and their lobby shops were remarkable. There was a new shop for Bottega Veneta, and it was brand new. It opened in mid-December of 2024. So it was only, it was about a month old when we were in there. But the workmanship of this store was absolutely phenomenal. It was all one species of wood, all one tone, all one level of sheen. It was a lustrous finish to the wood. But the craftsmanship and the scale and the bulk of the wood that they were using was just exquisite. And then there were basically two materials in this place. It was the beautiful wood, and it was a very bold terrazzo. And the terrazzo was the floor. The terrazzo was interior walls. The terrazzo was display plane. It was just absolutely beautiful workmanship. And
like true terrazzo or just simulated? Like
true.
Okay.
True. And
it is Vegas, so I had to ask.
Yes. But I think that, a store like that has to be rare, because it's just not, there's very few economic models that could support that. So you walk into a place like that and you know that you're in something very special, where the setting matches the value and price point of the goods that are available to you. Because I don't know, I learned a little bit about Bottega Veneta there while I was there in the shop, and they were very generous with their time and attention, and it was a beautiful experience. And then adjacent to Bottega Veneta is a brand that you may know called Chrome Hearts. Chrome Hearts, I don't know, seems to be built for the uber wealthy concert going public, but it's rocker attire. And they've had an original store in Las Vegas in the Forum Shops that was way ahead of its time, way back when. And now this newest store is all book matched marble on every surface. And it's exquisite, the level of detail that they've gone to in sizing, brand identity, in relief on the marble, and inlays of polished brass into the floor, and this enormous, beautiful barn door sliding panel that is mirror finished rose gold. And it's one beautiful expression of that very exquisite brand after another in that space. And so again, you're by the setting, the expectation and the temperament of that brand.
Right on. Okay, perfect. Okay, let's talk about prioritizing, different aspects. So in retail, we've talked about this already to a great extent, but I want to ask the question very specifically. When it comes to designing retail, what do you prioritize that is different from other spaces, office, schools, whatever?
Therein lies that is the biggest difference, because in retail design, we have to prioritize the productivity of the product. Recently, working with the University Co-op at the University of Texas in Austin, our process with them was to review their performance by category to help us all together decide where products need to live as we remodeled their 3 stories. And the most productive products get the most productive positions. And that, having that as a basis of your decision making is very empowering, because not only do you have, it gives you, that's how things are done in retail. We're there to move product and motivate people. So that is our priority, is understanding how we sell.
How much does, and this is way off script for me, but how much does retail design filter customers? And not necessarily economically, but, there's certain, AOI profiles or whatever the current trend is in the way we differentiate customers. How much does the store design welcome a certain target market and sort of send a message to the non-members of that target market that, maybe this isn't your spot? Rich, do you want to take a go at that one? I know that's a tough one, but how much does that come into your thought when you're in a project?
I mean, I don't think we ever specifically say we don't want these people to come in, but okay. I think if we correctly communicate what a brand is, I mean, that's kind of the brand itself is creating that.
Right.
That division already. There aren't too many brands out there that go for everybody. They always have that division. And I think also, like, let's say you walk into a mall, for the first time and you're seeing stores you've never seen before, you're probably going to have a good idea of which ones you want to walk in, or which ones are appropriate, or which ones are definitely not appropriate, just based on certain cues and signals that store's selling you, whether it's how much or how little product, or the quality of the materials, the smell, the music that's playing in it, the friendliness or not friendliness of the staff, all of that. I mean, there's a whole lot of cues that they're sending right away. And I think, again, that just goes back to the brand being who they are, so that they can find the people who resonate and who click with them. And, someone else wants to walk in, great, but that's not who they're trying to catch.
Right.
One of the great segmentations in our business is a generalist versus a specialist. And you might consider, just in broad terms, that a department store is more of a generalist than is a specialty retail store.
Right.
Specialty retail store being a standalone Sephora, a Victoria's Secret, an Abercrombie and Fitch, an Alo, a Lululemon store. Those are all specialty retail shops versus Macy's, Target, Penny's.
Right.
Penny's is still kind of a big deal, actually, in the world with 800 stores or more. So that's a big distinction. And one of the things that makes them very different is that a department store is welcoming to everyone, but appealing to almost no one.
Right. Gotcha. Yeah.
A specialty store is very specific about who they're interested in, because they have a very finite view of their product and their customer. their shopper, their buyer. Their music is different. Their lighting level is different. They are spotlighting versus ambient lighting. I hate ambient lighting. So the entire proposition between department store and specialty retail is very different. It's a little bit like the difference between fast food and fast casual or even fine dining.
Right. I gotcha. You mentioned lighting. Let's dive into that. As you guys know, I'm a daylighting guy. That's my world outside of this podcast. Let's go back to the Heshong Mahone studies from the late 90s where they talked about like these massive increases in sales as the result of having natural light in the stores. And then you'll go to Hollister, which is, a very dark sort of space and obviously very conscious to create something different. How much do you try to integrate daylighting and how much does it depend on a particular objective?
Daylighting is almost a luxury.
Daylighting is a luxury. Even with the data that that everybody's aware of, daylighting is a luxury. Is that because of the density that retail spaces are usually found in?
Well, glass is expensive.
Yeah.
And until Target launched their City Target brands so many years ago, they're now just normal Target stores.
Yeah.
Target didn't have show windows. They didn't have glass on their exterior. They had doors, but the rest of it was an opaque CMU block building.
Yeah.
Interior mall spaces and corporate centers are artificial lighting because there's little to no access to the outside.
Right.
Grocery stores are largely enclosed because daylighting deteriorates the freshness of their product. It shortens the shelf life of product in store.
Fresh product.
So that might be one of the very essential differences between big A architecture and little a architecture for retail. And that is we can't often afford access to natural lighting. And sometimes it's a detriment to the success of our business.
Interesting. I've
Sorry
never heard that before.
Ruin your world like that, Joe.
Oh, my world is okay, but that's really important. That is really important. That's interesting. Now, Walmart has lots and lots of skylights. You see lots of those bubble dome sort of style skylights at Walmart, and it's it is a direct result of the Heshong Mahone study. How would you speak to their choice of having lots of natural light in a relatively, obviously it's Walmart. It's not a luxury brand by any stretch of the imagination.
That's true. I guess I discounted that skylight as being natural light. When you said natural light, I think of being able to see sky and tree and as it incorporated into the experience.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you were talking more about, view and, sort of biophilic views and that sort of aspect of it. Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. But that makes sense.
Yeah. They do have quite a bit of natural light. And I think they've solved the fluctuation of daylight and artificial light so much as when clouds go over. That was always an interesting condition in there. But
right.
You brought that up. What do you love about the natural light? How'd you get into that?
Yeah, we were chatting a little bit before Rich showed up, and I started in the world of greenhouses. I'm a chemical engineer, and I was working in the world of plastics, and it was just my first foray into sales and marketing, which led into residential skylights and sunrooms and that sort of world. And I wanted to move back to my home. I was living in Ontario, Toronto area, and I wanted to move back to my home in Nova Scotia and discovered that there was a company, Advanced Glazings here, that was doing daylighting, and I'd had lots of experience with, as I said, bringing light into structures in different ways, but I reached out and it ended up being a really good fit. So I sort of became an evangelist after, reading study after study. Originally, it was just to put things into the presentations, but then I became a true believer for a million reasons. And, some of the science that's coming out now in terms of the really detrimental health effects of removing portions of the visible light spectrum, removing the around 480 nanometers of the blue, or not having enough of it can have a serious impact on our sleep. Removing a lot of the red and the near infrared from artificial lighting has even more serious detrimental health effects. And the more they study it, the more they realize how much damage we're doing by not having access to full spectrum light. So yeah, I've become a zealot for sure. But that's the journey that I took. And yeah, I look at every opportunity to examine chances to bring more light and spaces. And I'm a big believer in views too, the same way I'm a big believer in fresh air and, the things that just create healthier spaces for us.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I was just looking into that I guess it's an interesting term, but the sunsetting of full spectrum UV or LED lighting that's supposed to happen by, I think it's 2028. And that there is a petition to influence lawmakers to maybe rescind that regulation that is coming into play. And I've asked our regenerative design group to help inform me what Little's position is on that, because it sounds like we have the ability to create the setting of natural lighting or replicate the health benefits of natural lighting, where I think, as I understand it, the push to remove a portion of the spectrum is that the light quality isn't necessarily better, but the power consumption would be reduced a little bit by limiting the light spectrum that is produced.
A lot of the energy in lighting is in the red end of the spectrum, the red and the near infrared. So by taking that out, you can significantly reduce the amount of energy you're consuming. But simultaneously, you're taking away light that is being shown that the human body actually needs. So it's a trade-off that I like to speak of often on the show, actually, because we're basically prioritizing energy over health. And that's an interesting debate for obvious reasons. But, I choose health. And it's not just because of what I do for a living. It's because of what I believe in. And I don't think it makes sense for us to be taking actions that minimizes our ability to thrive on a day-to-day basis and throughout our lives. And that's sounded kind of preachy, but it is indeed how I feel. So I love any opportunity to connect us to the natural world, fresh air. Again, it's been spoken of on the show many times, but I mean, we lived for millennia or more outside in the natural world. It's the last 100 years where we've come indoors. And if you look at the percentages, everybody says 90. It's even higher than that now. It's closer to like 95% of our day is spent inside of buildings. And we're not designed for that.
As architects, we say, thank God you're indoors so often. But, don't apologize for preaching, because it's the truly informed that need to speak up more often, because someone has obviously spoken up in favor of the opposite side. Together, maybe we'll arrive at the best solution. But
that's exactly the objective, Eric. Absolutely. That's exactly the objective, to arrive in the right compromise, or better yet, eliminate the compromise. And that's the goal.
Well, right. Joe, I feel like we've all been saved from the era of fluorescent tubes and the vitamin depletion that we all suffer.
Amen.
And you know what? I come from a retail family, and I've always been at home in stores, and I've always loved them. And some of my earliest childhood memories are of retail stores, including a now defunct chain called Ontario's.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of that? No. I remember Ontario's store, and it was, an enclosed facade, a transom window above the CMU. And my view of the Ontario store was at night, and it was a full field of fluorescent tubes just from storefront to store back. That's what I remember driving by. That's the image that I have of that brand in my head. So we've come so far in terms of technology and lighting and how much better it is. And the energy savings from where we were to where we are today is a miracle. And maybe, small and incremental reductions in power is not our highest goal anymore.
There are times whenever it's possible, bring in natural light, I guess, is the general rule of thumb. But there's scenarios, and you guys probably deal with a lot of them, especially in a mall situation, where you're just not going to have the option. But what needs to be looked at there is, add some incandescent lighting, some component of red, right? It's really not all that complicated. And yeah, there is a little bit of an energy trade-off there, but you're creating a healthier space. But anyway, I've preached a lot. We're getting close to the end, and there's another topic that I really love to hear you guys talk about a little bit, and that's the increase in e-commerce, right? And has there been a response from a store design perspective to, win back a little bit of that market share in the bricks and mortar retail world? Rich, let's go to you first. How do you feel about that? Are you being challenged specifically to try to get people back into stores, or at least, a percentage of their dollars come back through bricks and mortar retail?
I mean, I think this is Eric's rant.
Oh, okay.
The golden age of retail, which I agree with it, but I'll let him take it away.
Okay.
If he's willing.
Well, God love you. There was much hubbub over e-commerce and a lot of chicken littles running around saying that the store was dead. And, I think pure play e-commerce got the drop on traditional retail where there was a lot of leakage out of stores into online, but very quickly and through hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, the retail vertical got into competitive situation in the e-commerce game. So now we see that something over or around 20% of all dollars are transacted online. What we don't understand fully, or that I don't know the statistic on, is what portion of that 20% online purchase is done through a traditional brick and mortar vertical, meaning I go to target.com or I go to walmart.com or lululemon.com, right? And it's purchased online, picked up in store. So choose your brand that's available to almost everyone that is someone nowadays. And those that don't have it are working to deliver that. Amazon is clearly the leader in all e-commerce. I believe that they hold something over 60% of all transactions happen through Amazon.
Wow.
Online for retail purchases. It highlights the fact that because I can make a few clicks here on my laptop or on my mobile device, that I don't need the store to be the sole repository of goods anymore. That is not the sole purpose of the retail store. So the retail store now has been threatened, but by the same token, it has been given freedom to become more experiential, to deliver something you can only get in person, and to reward you for making that trip. Because when we're playing a very dangerous game of being price-oriented and price-oriented only, each one of those shoppers is available to be poached on any given occasion. Our purpose is to create a condition for your brand in your store where people value the trip into your place. So stores need to become more about the things that you can't do online. It needs to be about immediacy. It needs to be about touch and feel, taste and see, all of those things that you can't do necessarily online. It's what the store is for. And
exploration, discovery,
yes,
all of those things. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I love it. Do you want to bring lots of healthy, beautiful, natural light in your building and still meet energy codes? Try Solera from Advanced Glazings. Learn more at advancedglazings.com. Okay, we have to talk about sustainability a little bit. How much is sustainability playing a role in retail store design these days? Are you being asked on a regular basis to do things that visibly demonstrate a commitment to sustainable design to the customers who come into the stores?
I mean, it's probably very brand dependent. I mean, there are some brands out there that are very focused on that, and they will definitely pay a premium gladly to be able to improve the sustainability of the environments that they go into. I think it's one of those things that we're trying to measure and track as best as we can where things are at, but also just understanding just the difficulties in regards to speed, availability of what we need, the type of materials, obviously making the best decisions we can and going with the best option we can. But in some ways, just retail has a different level and different types of constraints that we're dealing with on topics like that. I mean, on the flip side, I think that one of the great things that people don't realize with retail is that just the high percentage of adaptive reuse that retail is. We're going into spaces that already exist from a carbon perspective. We're not creating ground up buildings every time we do a project.
Right.
So a lot of it's just a lot simpler upfits, and just trying to work as efficiently and as best we can in each of those scenarios that we have.
Is there anything you can do design-wise in terms of, elements that you'd bring into the design that are a statement in and of themselves of a commitment to sustainability?
We have this conversation often here. Conscious consumerism is a particular focus in our retail group. And so we have struggled with actually what that means, because part of the inception of that notion of conscious consumerism is doing without. And so as we practice retail design and we need our clients to be more successful, encouraging people to do without is not a growth strategy.
Right.
Helping people make better choices is a growth strategy for us. So as we are retailers and we create the stage and the setting for transactions and the distribution and access of goods, we are rather the silent participants in that, because we plan the shelf that the goods rest on. So the retailer choosing better goods to populate their store that come from a better source, that come in cleaner packaging. All of those things contribute to the sustainability of the retail premise, and very much less so the building itself, because the building is set. And like in the sense of a grocery store, God willing, it will be in that neighborhood for the next 40 years.
Right on.
Right. And so what cycles through that store is far more a part of the environmental consideration than is the building in and of itself. But as a company, Little is very committed to regenerative practices in our design. Rich has been studying suppliers of fixtures and other retail implements that have the best processes that we feel like we can endorse, including where they get their steel and if they're using, whatever they're using. We can do things like that. And we do that every day.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, we are running out of time, but I have to ask my $1 million question. You know the question, and I ask it at every episode, and I ask you to choose to answer it from whatever perspective you like, and we're going to start with Rich. I'm sorry, Rich, but we're going to start with you. What makes a great building?
I mean, a great building, I guess, is a place that people want to be, right? A place that people want to go into, and it's not. I mean, we definitely know what bad buildings are. They're definitely places we don't want to approach and don't want to go inside. So if it's a place that I want to be, go inside, it's inspiring. It just, it goes beyond potentially its original purpose. That makes a great building.
Beautiful. All right, Eric, how about yourself? What makes a great building?
We have a couple of examples for you, and that was the Selfridges building in Birmingham. It's a really beautiful organic shape, but it was built specifically for Selfridges. It's part of our conversation earlier of how we control the language of form, and that's very rare in the retail realm. And on the Miracle Mile, the Burberry store on Michigan Avenue that is wrapped in a glossy dimensional version of the Burberry plaid is just, it's breathtaking in person. It's really something to see. The Nike House of Innovation in Manhattan has custom glass that feels like the puffy windows of their Nike Air product. So there's a few beautiful buildings. We probably prize them for different reasons, but not every building has to be grand to be a great building. But I believe that what happens in those buildings are paramount to the structure of them. And I always look for joy inside the building.
Rich, Eric, thank you so much. I wish this could go on, but all good things must come to an end. I can't thank you guys enough. Rich, it's a pleasure.
Thank you, Joe.
Eric, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
All right.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you, Eric.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.